In my family, I was never the favorite. I was just the one who answered when no one else did. My younger brother was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one my parents bragged about at church, the one whose college tuition they scraped together even when money was tight. My older sister was the dramatic one, the one who got the sympathy, the one who could cry in the kitchen and have my mother's full attention for 3 hours. And me? I was the one who got a part-time job at 16 to pay for my own school clothes. I was the one who figured things out quietly, without asking anyone to watch. By the time I was 28, I had a decent career in accounting, a one-bedroom apartment I paid for myself, and a habit of saying yes to my family that I hadn't yet learned to break. My brother, Theo, I'll call him that, had always been the idea guy. Full of plans, full of energy, full of reasons why this time was different. When he told me over Christmas dinner that he wanted to open a restaurant, I wasn't surprised. He'd done this before. There was the food truck that never launched, the online store that went quiet after 2 months, the investment opportunity that I thankfully said no to. But this time, his eyes were different. He had a location. He had a concept. He had a business plan printed and spiral-bound, which he slid across the table to me like it was a legal document. "I just need a partner," he said, "someone who believes in me." I read the whole thing that night. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He'd done the research, worked out the margins, found a space in a neighborhood that was genuinely up and coming, and he didn't want a loan. He was clear about that. He wanted a partner, equal stakes, shared ownership, 50-50. I put in $40,000. That was most of my savings. I want you to understand what $40,000 meant to me at 28. That was 3 years of eating lunch at my desk instead of going out, of skipping vacations, of driving a car with a broken AC through 2 Georgia summers because I didn't want to take on a car payment. That money was mine in the way that only money you earned and protected yourself can be yours. But I believed in him, and more than that, I wanted for once to be part of something in my family instead of just watching from the outside. We signed an agreement. I have a copy of it still, in a manila folder in my filing cabinet because I am an accountant and I know better than to skip the paperwork even when you love someone. The first year was hard but exciting. I helped with the bookkeeping on weekends. I covered 2 months of payroll when cash flow got tight in the winter. I came in on a Saturday to help paint the back storage room because the contractor they hired did a terrible job. I was there. I was present. I was a partner in every sense of the word. And then things started to shift. It was small at first. My brother stopped texting me the monthly numbers like he used to. When I asked about the books, he'd say he was working on it, that his manager was handling it, that he'd send them soon. Soon kept becoming later. Later kept becoming when I had a chance to ask in person. I told myself he was busy. The restaurant was doing well. I could see that with my own eyes. The tables were full on weekends. There was a line on Friday nights. I'd heard him tell my mother that business was really picking up. But I wasn't hearing it from him directly, not as a partner. Then, about 18 months in, I stopped by the restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon just to drop off some documents, and I noticed something. The sign above the door had been updated. It used to say the restaurant's name. Our restaurant's name, the one we'd agreed on together. Now there was a small addition underneath it, in a different font, a tagline of sorts. But also, in small letters near the bottom of the new awning, A. Theo Hansen Family Kitchen. I stood on the sidewalk and I read it 3 times. I didn't say anything that day. I went home and I told myself it was just branding, just marketing, and that my brother probably hadn't thought about how it looked. I gave him the benefit of the doubt the way I had given it to him his entire life. A few weeks later, we had a family dinner at my parents' house. My mother made pot roast, the good kind with carrots and potatoes, the kind she only made when she was in a good mood. Everyone was there. My brother, his girlfriend at the time, my sister, my parents, me. And someone brought up the restaurant. "It's so wonderful," my mother said, looking at my brother. "You built something real, from nothing." "I really did," he said. I waited. I waited for him to say we. I waited for him to glance at me across the table and include me in that sentence the way a partner would. He didn't. I said lightly, "We've put a lot of work into it." And my brother said, "And I remember this exactly. Yeah, it's been a real labor of love. It's important to me that it stays a family thing, you know? That's what makes it special." My sister nodded. My parents nodded. Nobody asked what I meant by we. Nobody looked at me. I drove home that night with my hands very steady on the wheel and a feeling in my chest that I didn't have a word for yet. I found the word about 2 weeks later, when I sent my brother a formal message. Nothing aggressive, just a routine request, asking to review the current financial statements for the business, as was my right as a 50% partner. I asked for the updated profit and loss, the current balance sheet, and a record of distributions if any had been made. He took 4 days to respond. When he did, his message was 3 sentences long. He said things had gotten complicated. He said he'd talked to a lawyer and he thought it might be better if we restructured the arrangement. He said he didn't think the original agreement reflected where the business was now and that he wanted to set up a time to talk. I read that message, standing in the parking lot of a grocery store, and I didn't move for probably a full minute. I knew what restructure meant. I'd done enough accounting work to know that when someone wants to restructure an arrangement after a business becomes successful, it means they want to move the money and the credit toward themselves. I knew what was happening. I just hadn't let myself know it yet. I called him that evening. He answered on the third ring and he was pleasant, and that pleasantness made everything worse. He talked about how the business had really become his vision, how he was the one in there every day, how the day-to-day operation was really the hard part and the initial funding was just the start. He said he thought a buyout might make sense. He threw out a number. The number was less than what I had put in. I asked him if he was serious. He said he thought it was fair given the circumstances. I asked him which circumstances specifically. He said, "Look, I just think this works better as a solo thing. It's my name on it, it's my reputation. I need to be able to make decisions without a partner looking over my shoulder." There it was. Partner said like it was something he was tolerating. Partner said like I had been hovering, like I had been difficult, like my asking for financial statements had been an unreasonable imposition instead of a basic contractual right. I told him I needed to think about it. He said okay. He sounded relieved. I didn't sleep much that night. I went through the agreement again. I looked up the relevant Georgia business statutes. I called a friend who works in corporate law and explained the situation in broad strokes, and she said without hesitation that if the agreement said 50-50, it meant 50-50, and that a unilateral buyout at below market value was not something he could just decide. I also thought about something else, something I had been setting aside for 3 months because I didn't know what to do with it. About 3 months before this call, I had been helping close out the books for the previous quarter, still trying to do my job as a partner, and I had found some things that didn't add up. Not missing money kinds of things, not at first. More like inconsistencies, cash expenses without receipts, line items that were vague, a consulting fee paid to a name I didn't recognize once a month, starting about 6 months in. I had mentioned it to my brother once, casually, and he brushed it off and said it was a vendor he used for sourcing. I let it go. But I had kept copies of everything, the way accountants do, the way I always do, because I was raised by chaos and I learned early to document things in case the floor dropped out. Now I looked at those documents again, more carefully this time. The consulting fee was going to an LLC. I looked up the LLC. It was registered in Georgia, filed about 8 months after the restaurant opened. The registered agent was someone I didn't know, but the mailing address on the filing was my brother's girlfriend's apartment. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I didn't immediately decide what to do with that information. That's important for you to understand. I'm not someone who acts from anger. I work in numbers. I think slowly and carefully. And I had loved my brother my whole life, even when he made it difficult. So I reached back out to him. I said I'd thought about his offer and I wasn't accepting it. I said I wanted a formal accounting of all business financials since inception, as the agreement entitled me to. I said if he wanted to buy me out, we could discuss a fair market valuation. I kept it professional. I kept it measured. His response came the next morning. He said that was fine, but that he'd spoken to our parents, and they thought I was being difficult about this. He said our mother was upset. He said, and I'm quoting here almost exactly, "You're not really a part of the business in the way you think you are. You put in money. That's different from actually building something. Anyone can write a check." I read that sentence 4 times. Anyone can write a check. I thought about the Saturday I spent painting that storage room. I thought about the 2 months of payroll I covered so we wouldn't have to lay anyone off. I thought about every weekend I spent on his bookkeeping, every spreadsheet I built, every vendor invoice I organized. I thought about $40,000, 3 years of lunch at my desk, 2 summers of broken AC. Anyone can write a check. I called my mother that afternoon, not to vent, not to pull her into my side, just to understand what she actually thought. She said she didn't want family drama. She said my brother had worked so hard. She said sometimes you have to let things go for the sake of keeping peace. She said, "You've always been the practical one, you'll be fine." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask what the agreement said. She had already decided. I hung up and I sat in my apartment and I was very quiet for a long time. That was the moment, I think. Not the message about the sign. Not the family dinner where he said I instead of we. Not even the restructure conversation. It was my mother's voice, warm, familiar, entirely uncurious, saying you'll be fine without asking if I was. That was when I understood that I had been funding a system that had never actually included me. I went back to the financials. I spent 2 weekends going through everything I had, every document, every statement, every screenshot I'd taken of records during my time managing the books. I was meticulous. I organized it chronologically. I flagged the inconsistencies. I traced the LLC back through its filings, and I found that the consulting fee, paid monthly, always in a round number, never with a corresponding service record, totaled just over $22,000 over the period I could account for. $22,000 moved to an LLC registered at his girlfriend's address while the business was technically my partnership. I formatted everything into a clean report, neat columns, clear notes, flagged line items highlighted in yellow, source documents attached. The kind of report you could hand to an attorney and have them understand in 20 minutes. And then I did something I want to explain carefully because I know it might look a certain way from the outside. I did not send it to my brother. I did not send it to my parents. I did not post it anywhere or show it to anyone in the family. I sent it to his girlfriend. I know how that sounds. Let me explain. I wasn't trying to blow up their relationship. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I sent it to her because she had a right to know. The LLC was registered at her address. Her name was not on it as far as I could find, but her address was being used for what appeared to be a financial arrangement that she may or may not have known about. If she knew, then she had made a choice and it wasn't my business to do anything further. If she didn't know, then she deserved to. That's all. That was the whole reason. I included a note that was 4 sentences long. I said I was a business partner of her boyfriend's, that I had been reviewing financials, that there were some things I thought she should be aware of, and that the attached documents were for her review. I wished her well. I did not editorialize. I did not call him names. I sent the documents and I closed my laptop. That was on a Thursday evening. By Saturday morning, I had 3 missed calls from my brother. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk, and honestly, I wasn't sure what there was left to say. On Sunday, I got a message from my sister, not about the business, not about the LLC, just a simple, "Hey, call me when you can. Is everything okay?" That was different from what I expected, so I called her. She'd heard some of it. She wasn't sure what to believe, she said. She asked me to explain from the beginning. So I did. I told her everything. I told her about the $40,000, the agreement, the request for financials, the buyout offer, the sign on the awning, the dinner where he said I instead of we, the phone call, the message where he said anyone can write a check, Mom's voice telling me I'd be fine. I told her about the LLC and what I'd found and why I'd sent what I sent. My sister was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Why didn't you tell any of us sooner? And I said, because every time I've tried to be included in this family, I get told I'm being difficult. Another silence. Then she said, that's fair. 2 words. Just those 2, but they meant something. The weeks that followed were messy in the way that family things always are. My brother was furious at me, at his girlfriend, at the situation. His girlfriend, from what I understand, had not known about the LLC, or at least not the full picture of it, and she had questions of her own that he apparently was not handling well. I don't know exactly what happened between them because it wasn't my business and I stayed out of it. My mother called me twice. The first time, she was upset and said I had embarrassed the family. The second time, a week later, she was quieter. She said she hadn't known about the business arrangement, not really, not the specifics. She said she wished I had come to her sooner. I said, as gently as I could, that I had tried at that family dinner and in smaller ways before it, and that coming to her hadn't felt like an option. She didn't respond to that directly. But she didn't argue with it either. I hired an attorney. We sent a formal letter to my brother outlining my rights under the partnership agreement and requesting full financial disclosure within 30 days. I am not going to tell you how that process ended because it's still ongoing in some ways, and my attorney would probably prefer I not discuss the details publicly. What I will say is that I have not accepted a below-value buyout, and I don't intend to. I moved my personal accounts to a different bank, a small thing, but it felt important. I took my name off the family cell phone plan. I've been contributing to it for 4 years, quietly, the way I did everything. I stopped being the one who coordinated holiday dinners. I stopped being the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and organized the group gift. None of these things were dramatic. I didn't announce them. I just stopped. It's been about 7 months now. My brother and I don't speak. My mother and I have a careful, polite relationship. We talk on the phone occasionally, and it's cordial, and that's what it is for now. My sister and I are actually closer than we've ever been. She reached out a few weeks after that first call and asked if I wanted to get dinner. We went to a Thai place near her apartment and we talked for 3 hours, and somewhere in there I realized I had never actually had that with her before. We had been orbiting each other our whole lives without ever really landing. The restaurant is still open. I drove past it last month. The awning still says Theo Hansen Family Kitchen. I looked at it and I felt, honestly, almost nothing, just a kind of tired clarity, like looking at an old photo of a place you used to think was home. Here's what I keep coming back to. The thing I find myself turning over when I'm sitting in traffic or making coffee in the morning. I was useful to my family for a long time. I was the one who handled things, who showed up quietly, who didn't make a fuss. And for years I confused being useful with being included. I thought if I kept showing up with my checkbook and my spreadsheets and my willingness, eventually they would make room for me at the table. But I was never waiting to be let in. I was already inside. I was just standing in the kitchen washing dishes while everyone else sat down to eat. I'm learning to sit down now. It took me 28 years and $40,000 and a lot of Tuesdays eating lunch at my desk, but I'm learning. You can't buy your way into belonging, and you shouldn't have to. That's the part I think I'll be untangling for a while. But at least I know now. At least I know. I keep thinking about the sign. Theo Hansen Family Kitchen. I drove past it 7 months after everything fell apart, and what struck me wasn't anger. It was how ordinary it looked. Just a building. Just an awning. I had given that place $40,000 and 2 summers of my life, and it looked exactly like something I had never been part of. That's how consequences work, I think. Not loudly, not dramatically. They just arrive quietly in the shape of things that now make perfect sense. I was the practical one. I was always the practical one, and for a long time I thought that was a compliment. I thought it meant I was trusted, that I was valued, that my steadiness was something the people around me were grateful for. What I didn't understand, what took me 28 years to figure out, is that being called practical by the people who need you is sometimes just a polite way of saying we know you'll handle it and not make a scene. It's not respect, it's convenience. The thing about Theo is that he didn't set out to hurt me. I actually believe that. He just kept making small choices. The sign, the dinner, the word I instead of we, each one so small he probably didn't notice it. And I kept letting them pass because I told myself that's what family does. You extend grace. You don't make things difficult. You keep showing up. But there's a difference between grace and erasure. I didn't learn to tell them apart until I was sitting in a grocery store parking lot reading a 3-sentence message that told me the person I had funded for 18 months didn't think I was a real partner. Just the bank. Anyone can write a check. What I did after that wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. When I organized those documents and sent them to his girlfriend, I wasn't acting from rage. I was acting from something slower and more deliberate, a sense that the truth existed, that someone else had a right to it, and that sitting quietly on information to keep the peace had been my role in this family for long enough. I was done being quiet in ways that cost other people their ability to make informed decisions about their own lives. That's the part I'm most at peace with, not the outcome, the clarity it took to get there. I spent a long time being someone who could be relied on without being included. And I think the reason I stayed in that position for so long is that I confused loyalty with self-erasure. I thought if I kept giving my money, my weekends, my silence, eventually I would earn my place at the table. What I understand now is that you don't earn belonging in a family. Either it's offered freely or it isn't really belonging at all. The documents I sent, the attorney I hired, the accounts I moved, none of those were acts of vengeance. They were acts of someone finally deciding that her own interests were worth protecting. That's not a radical idea. It just took me a while to believe I deserved to act on it. My sister called me last week to make plans for Thanksgiving. We're going to her place this year, just the two of us and her boyfriend and some friends from her neighborhood. She asked if I wanted to bring anything, and I said I'd bring pie, and she laughed and said obviously. It's a small thing. But I drove home from that phone call feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not vindicated. Not relieved. Just included. Casually, easily, without having to earn it. That's what I'm learning to look for now.